Okay. Hi, my name's Natalie Cross, and I was a part of the SESUR cohort this summer. I worked with Dr. Nick Sawe, Dr. Tierney Teese, and Dr. Brian Knutson on a project titled Assessing the Impact of National Geographic's Nature Imagery that I'm going to tell you a little bit about today. So the main question that I was answering throughout my research this summer was what makes an impactful nature photograph? And so I did this by looking at a sample of 890 photographs that were collected over a 3-month time period on National Geographic's Instagram page. And these photographs were taken by a wide variety of photographers in a wide variety of different places. So there's a huge diverse set within this large collection of data. And so I looked at 2 different variables when trying to measure the impact of these photographs. And I'm going to talk about 2 of them with you today. The first one is engagement, and that was the interaction between the viewers and on the Instagram page with the photograph. So that was measured by looking at the number of likes and comments that each photograph had. And then the second one was positive versus negative arousal. And so this refers to the strength of emotion that was felt when viewing the photographs. And this one was measured by some coding done by research assistants in the lab. So I'm going to rely a little less heavily on this because it's a little more subjective than the engagement variable. But they both had some interesting results. So I'm going to talk about both of them with you guys. So first off, I found some interesting correlations between the presence of nature versus urban settings and engagement in a photograph. So as can be seen in this graph, the graph on the left here, as you move to the right on the bottom axes, the photograph has more natural elements in it. And as you can see, engagement increases as there's more natural elements. And then as you can see in these 2 graphs on the right-hand side, as there are more humans in an urban setting, there's a negative correlation with engagement. So basically that means that there's higher engagement when a photograph has more natural elements, wildlife, etc., but lower engagement when the photograph has humans or is set in an urban setting. And in addition, there also was a correlation between this nature versus urban distinction and positive arousal. So these graphs are very similar, a little less distinct than the engagement one. Basically, there's higher positive arousal, higher positive emotion when viewing a photograph set in a natural setting without humans, compared to lower positive emotion when the photograph was set in an urban setting and had more humans present. And another category that we looked at to compare with these 2 variables was the biomes that the photographs were set in. So we broke the photographs into 3 different types of biomes. The first one are deserts, then mountains, and then ocean, like underwater biomes. And as you can see in these 3 graphs, on the left-hand side is the desert binary, and there is basically no correlation between engagement and the desert biome. The graphs are basically the same for both of these. The bars are the same height, and so there was no difference in engagement whether or not the photograph was located in the desert region or not. But the reverse happens with the mountain and ocean biomes. As you can see here, there is indeed a positive correlation between the presence of a mountain biome in a photograph or an ocean biome in a photograph and engagement. So that's just kind of an interesting thing for photographers to think about when they're focusing on the location in which they're going to shoot their pictures in, so that there is higher engagement with photos taken in these mountain and ocean regions. In addition, there was a little bit of a correlation between negative arousal and biomes. The only pictures seen here are of ocean and underwater settings because the only correlation found with negative arousal was within ocean and underwater settings. However, I included it because the correlation was so strong. As you can see, these graphs are pretty distinct, and there was a pretty strong correlation between photographs set in an underwater setting and negative arousal. So there was a heightened level of negative emotion when viewing these photographs set in these water settings. However, that being said, as we just saw earlier, there was still higher engagement when seeing these photos in the ocean setting. So having a high negative arousal does not necessarily mean that there's lower levels of engagement, which is also interesting. And lastly, I looked at the presence of predators and threat levels and how that correlated with 2 of the variables, engagement and negative arousal. So as can be seen in this graph, on the top level, we have negative arousal compared to presence of predators and perceived threat level. And as there are predators present or the threat level increases as you move to the right-hand side, negative arousal increases. So that's positively correlated, which kind of makes sense. But also interestingly, there is also a correlation between engagement and predator and perceived threat levels. You can see in the bottom row of these graphs. And it is a little less stark than the negative arousal, but it just goes to show that having a heightened level of negative arousal doesn't necessarily mean there's a lower level of engagement. And in fact, it tends to also correlate with having higher levels of engagement, which is interesting. So my work that I did this summer was kind of just looking at the data set, getting as much information as we could from the pure data set that we had of these photographs on Instagram. But this is just the beginning stage of a much larger project. And the next step is going to be to do a cross-cultural survey. And so we're going to do a survey starting in the United States and then spreading out to India and Indonesia to get external feedback about how people in these 3 different countries react to these photographs. So how it affects their engagement, their positive and negative arousal, and then also how it influences their willingness to like donate or like help to protect the species or wildlife or region depicted in the photo. So basically, do these photographs impact their pro-environmental behavior? And this is going to be cross-cultural, which will be especially interesting because we'll be able to see if there are differences in people's interaction with these photographs depending on the country in which they live in. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to keep working with Nick and the lab on this project, so I'm really excited to see what comes out of it. And that's all for now. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Jenny and Bianca for putting everything together over the summer, and I'm really thankful that I was able to work on this project.